The mission that went wrong. Cole Varan had always trusted his training. As a human scout in the far edge of the Velo system, he had been through many missions, dangerous, lonely, sometimes boring. But this one felt different. The air was heavier. The silence was too deep, and his instincts kept warning him. But orders were orders. Command told him to investigate a research station that went dark 2 weeks ago. No signals, no survivors. No reasons. Just silence from a lab that was once full of life and technology. He arrived on the planet with full gear. His helmet sealed tight. His biofilter systems were strong, tested for toxic environments. The planet's air was poison, but he felt safe inside the suit. He moved fast through the broken rocks and ash-covered ground. The lab was buried halfway into a crater, metal walls scorched and melted. Something bad had happened here. As he stepped closer, his suit began to click. Something was wrong. A sudden jolt of static passed through his comms, and his helmet lights flickered. Then everything shut down. His oxygen level dropped. His biofilters stopped working. The red warning light screamed across his visor. Biofilter at 12%. Then 9%. Then 4%. The air inside his helmet started to feel thick, hard to breathe. He pressed buttons, tried to reset the systems, but nothing worked. Something had hit the tech. A pulse, a wave, maybe a trap. The lab wasn't just broken. It was deadly. He turned to leave, but then he saw something move. Not a shadow. Not a trick. Someone or something was crawling through the dirt near the collapsed side of the lab. Cole froze. He was almost out of oxygen, but curiosity and something deeper held him in place. He watched closely. It was a figure, covered in cracked silver armor, coughing and dragging one leg behind. The shape was clearly not human. She had deep purple skin under her armor, a long tail coiled behind her, and sharp ridges along her arms. Cole knew that form. She was a Zareen warrior, part of a species that once fought humans in a brutal war. She should have been his enemy. She wasn't attacking. She was barely moving. One of her arms was broken. Her helmet was off. She was breathing in the toxic air directly, her face pale and strained. She wasn't a threat. She was dying. Cole didn't know what to do. His oxygen was almost gone. His systems were failing. But as he looked at her, something in her eyes caught him. Fear, pain, and something else, hope. She lifted her hand slightly toward him. He knew what she wanted. Help, a filter. A chance to breathe. He had one emergency filter pack left. If he gave it to her, he would die. If he kept it, she would die. No one would know. No one would blame him for choosing himself. But Cole was not that kind of man. He moved toward her slowly. Each step made his chest tighter, his lungs heavier. He reached into his side pouch, pulled out the last clean filter, and held it to her mouth. Her eyes widened. She didn't understand at first. Then she took a weak breath in, and her body shuddered. Color returned to her face. Her sharp shoulders relaxed. She looked up at him again, confused. Why? She whispered. Cole didn't answer. He just smiled a little under his cracked visor, even as the filter warnings hit 1%. His breath came in short gasps. His knees buckled. But he still held the filter for her, still kept his hand steady. She tried to push it back to him, but he shook his head. She had a better chance of surviving. That was enough for him. He didn't know her name, didn't know if she would live. But he had made his choice. As his vision blurred and darkness started to crawl in from the edges, one last thought passed through his mind. She was supposed to be my enemy. But she's just like me, fighting to stay alive. Then everything went black. But the story didn't end there. Because what Cole didn't know was that the alien warrior he just saved was not just any soldier. She was a rebel, a fugitive. And now, because of him, Her mission, one that could change everything between their species, had a chance to succeed. And deep under the lab, something was watching, recording, waiting. The mission wasn't just broken. It was never meant to be finished. Not by him, but now, because of one human's last breath, fate had changed its path. Asterisk, the warrior who should have killed him, Kareth opened her eyes slowly, and for a moment she thought she was already dead. Her lungs burned, her body ached, and the heavy taste of filtered air still lingered in her throat. She was alive, but only because someone else had given her a chance. A human. Her training screamed at her that this was wrong. Humans were the enemy. They had burned her people's cities, destroyed their fleets, and turned her world into a battlefield. She had lost friends, blood, and faith because of humans. Yet here she was, breathing only because one of them had saved her. She turned her head and saw him lying beside her. His body was still. His suit was cracked. His eyes were closed. He wasn't breathing. The filter in her hands. It was his? He had used the last of his oxygen to save her. Kareth sat up slowly, her armor groaning from damage. Her mind was still foggy, but the truth was sharp. He could have walked away. He didn't. He should have left her to die. But instead, he gave her what little life he had left. She stared at him for a long time, unsure what to feel. Rage? No. Confusion? Maybe. Gratitude? That was harder to admit. In her culture, mercy was not weakness, but it was always given to allies, never enemies. And never at the cost of your own life. She checked his vitals. Faint pulse, shallow breathing. He was still alive, but only just. Kareth hesitated. Saving him meant risking herself. But something in her heart wouldn't let her leave. She dragged his body to the shadow of a cracked wall. Acid dust blew in from the horizon, and the sky had turned a deeper red. The storm was coming again. If they didn't find cover soon, both of them would melt before the hour was done. She looked around and saw a shattered metal panel leading into the ground. It was a maintenance hatch. Maybe the lab below was still intact. With effort, Kareth forced it open and pulled the human inside. Her arms trembled from the pain. She could feel blood trickling under her armor. But she kept moving, kept dragging him down the cold. Dark steps at the bottom. Flickering lights welcomed her into a long hallway filled with dust and strange humming sounds. The machines were old, but some were still alive. The energy in the air buzzed against her skin. She laid the human down and sealed the hatch above them. Safe for now, she knelt beside him and looked again at his face. Even now, unconscious and near death, there was no fear in him. Just calm, almost peace. Kareth didn't understand it. She removed her armor piece by piece, checked her wounds, and found a med kit in a corner. It wasn't her kind, but human tech wasn't too different anymore. She patched her cuts, drank from a cracked water tube, and sat quietly. She didn't know his name, didn't know why he was here, but he had saved her, and she couldn't leave that debt unpaid. She stood and searched the lab. Medical pods, broken consoles, damaged computers. The place had been attacked or maybe sabotaged. She found one functioning console and pulled up its last logs. Experiments, biological data, human and Zarine samples, notes on compatibility, tests about merging immune systems for shared survival on deadly worlds. Her eyes narrowed. So this was the truth. The lab wasn't about weapons. It was about unity. It was about creating peace through science. Someone didn't want that. Someone had destroyed it, and they almost killed her to bury the secret. Kareth returned to the human. She sat beside him again. Her mind was full, her heart heavy. She remembered the wars, the screams, the broken cities. And yet this man, this enemy, gave up everything without asking anything. She touched his chest gently. "You should have left." She whispered, "but you didn't. And now? I won't leave you." Kareth wasn't a healer, but she was a warrior. And warriors protected those who saved their lives. Even if it meant breaking every rule she once followed, she searched the lab again, hoping to find a way to save him. One pod still worked. Maybe it could restart his systems. Maybe not. But she would try, because for the first time in her life, Kareth no longer saw a human as an enemy. She saw him as someone worth saving. The storm that closed all escape, it wasn't thunder they heard first. It was the sound of metal screaming, far. Above the buried lab, the surface of the planet groaned as red winds began to rise. A storm was forming again, faster and hotter than the last. But this was no ordinary storm. On this world, storms were alive, made of acid and ash, strong enough to melt steel and rip bone from armor. Kareth felt it before she saw it, a pressure in her chest, a taste of static on her tongue. Her instincts, sharpened through war, told her one thing: if they weren't fully sealed inside, they would not survive the hour. She rushed back to the hatch and checked the seals. Weak. The storm had already started pressing through the smallest cracks. Acid dust was hissing through. She could smell it, burning, bitter. Her armor would survive it for minutes. He wouldn't survive at all. She turned back to him. The human still lay silent, his breath low, his face pale. Every second that passed, he slipped further away. She searched the dark corners of the lab for anything she could use. The machines here were old, some broken, others unfamiliar. Most had no power, but in the back, behind a fallen support beam, she found a medical pod half crushed, but still blinking. She dragged him toward it, pushing her own pain aside. Her body wasn't fully healed yet, but there was no time. She had to choose. The pod had one functioning cycle. One chance. Either she could use it and make herself strong again, or she could put him inside. She stared at the controls. Her fingers hovered. He saved her without knowing who she was, without asking if she was worth saving. Now it was her turn. And the decision was no easier. The wind above howled like a beast. The storm was ripping through the upper vents now. The ground trembled. Kareth knew what that meant. The lab was breaking. If they stayed here, both would die. She activated the pod and lifted him in. The pod hissed as it closed around him. The lights glowed dim blue. A scan began. It read his injuries, checked his vitals. Then it paused. Kareth frowned. The pod had found something strange. His biosystem had been altered not by her, but earlier. Deep inside his blood, something was changing. A mutation? A side effect of the planet's toxins? Or was it something the lab had done to him before? She didn't know. But the pod didn't reject him. It accepted him. The healing began. She sat beside the pod, watching, waiting. The storm above grew louder, now shaking the walls. The lab had only minutes left. Her eyes drifted to a corner screen that flickered to life on its own. A message appeared. Welcome. Subject X symbiosis phase detected. Project Unity. In progress. She didn't understand all the words, but the message felt important. This wasn't just an old lab. It was hiding something powerful, something about humans and her kind. Something that someone had tried very hard to erase. Kareth stood again and searched deeper into the lab. As she passed another corridor, she found a locked door glowing with strange light. Before she could try to open it, the ceiling cracked and acid dust poured in like a flood. She ran back, coughing, her armor sizzling where the dust touched it. She slammed the door behind her. The lab was closing in. The storm was eating everything. But inside the pod, the human's heart began to beat stronger. Slowly, steadily. His fingers twitched. His chest lifted with breath again. Kareth looked at him and felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not duty. Hope. For now, they were alive, but they were trapped. No signals, no escape. And far above them, the real enemy had already begun hunting. Someone had watched her activate the pod. Someone who wanted both of them to die here. And now, the storm wasn't the only thing closing in. Asterisk, a secret experiment that could save or kill. Humans shouldn't have been healing this fast. Kareth watched through the pod's glass as his wounds began to close. His skin gained color and his heartbeat grew stronger. It was unnatural. Even for human tech, this was too fast, too clean. The pod was repairing more than injuries. It was rewriting something inside him. She tapped the console again. A hidden file appeared, encrypted and old. She entered a command and the screen flashed open with strange diagrams, logs, and test results. Her eyes scanned the words slowly, translating as she read. Project Unity, a plan built in secret. Not a weapon, not a cure, but something stranger. A way to bond human and Zerine biology, merge immune systems, fuse blood traits, create life that could survive on dead worlds. Life that could resist poison, storms, war. Together. Kareth stepped back from the screen. This lab wasn't abandoned by accident. It had been buried, silenced. Someone didn't want this knowledge to exist. She looked at the human again. Cole. Varen. His name had appeared on the screen when the pod began. He wasn't just a random scout. He was connected to the project, maybe chosen, maybe tricked. But he had been altered before he came here. The changes were already inside him. Her hands tightened into fists. No wonder he survived the biofilter crash longer than expected. No wonder the pod recognized him. But if that was true, what did they put inside him? A new screen appeared, flickering with a warning. Genetic phase 3, 62%. Unstable sync detected. He was changing, and no one had told him. Kareth sat down hard, her mind spinning. What kind of human gives away his last breath without knowing he's part of something bigger? Was this bravery, or was it all part of a plan? She didn't want to believe that he was just a test subject. Not after what he did for her, but the doubts whispered in her mind. Was his kindness real or programmed? The lab around her groaned again. The storm had passed above, but the walls were weaker. The power grid was flickering. Time was running out. Then a noise echoed from the far side of the corridor. A soft clang. Something or someone was inside the lab. Kareth reached for her blade and stepped out carefully. Her body still hurt, but her warrior senses were sharp again. She moved through the dim light and found an old security door half open. Beyond it, a chamber filled with glowing tanks waited. Inside each tank was something unfinished, creatures half-formed. Some with human features, others with Zerine traits. Failed attempts, half alive, half dead. A chill went through her bones. They had tried to make a new species, a merged one. And they had failed again and again, but Cole was different. He wasn't created. He had survived the process. Somehow, his body had accepted the changes. That meant he was the first success. The last log on the console confirmed it. Subject X, only viable match. Escape test environment, unaware of his true nature. Kareth backed away. This was bigger than she thought. Cole wasn't just a soldier or a hero. He was proof that their two species could become one. And if the wrong people found out, he would be hunted, not for who he was, but for what he carried inside. She returned to the pod just as it finished the healing cycle. Cole's eyes fluttered open. He looked confused, weak but alive. She leaned over him, her voice quiet but firm. They did something to you, she said. Something you need to know." He stared at her, barely able to speak. But he nodded. She reached out, not as a warrior, but as someone who now understood what was at stake. "We're not enemies anymore," she said. "And if we want to live, we have to get out of here, together." But deep inside the lab, a silent alarm had been triggered, and far away, on a cold warship above the planet, red lights began to flash. They were no longer alone. Asterisk, a choice that changed everything. Cole was awake, but he wasn't the same. He could feel it deep in his chest, in his blood, even in his bones. Something inside him had shifted. The pain was gone, but in its place was a strange warmth, like his body had been rebuilt from the inside out. When he moved, his senses felt sharper. When he breathed, the air didn't burn. Not like before. Kareth watched him closely. She didn't speak for a long time. She had seen too much in the lab, failed test subjects, hidden files, and the truth about what he really was. He had survived the merging process. He wasn't just human anymore. And now someone would come to erase that truth. She sat beside him and finally said the words he needed to hear but didn't want to believe. "They used you, Cole. This place wasn't just a research station. It was a testing ground. You were the test." He blinked slowly, trying to process. "I didn't sign up for that," he whispered. "I know," she said. "But that doesn't change what's inside you now. And it doesn't change the fact that we're being hunted." Cole looked down at his hands. They looked normal, but they didn't feel normal. Something inside pulsed with quiet energy. Something not fully human, not fully alien. Something between. He stood up, shakily at first, then stronger. "Then we don't give them what they want," he said. "We shut this place down." Kareth almost smiled. Even now, with the truth exposed and the danger rising, he chose to fight. But escape wasn't going to be easy. The lab was falling apart, and the old lifts were dead. The only exit led through the old generator core, a maze of tunnels filled with melted floors and collapsing steel. They had one shot, and only minutes before the next patrol reached the planet's surface. Kareth loaded a small power cell into a broken console, trying to force the lab systems into one last use. Lights blinked. Maps appeared. And then, a new problem. To open the last door to the tunnels, someone had to stay behind and hold the power steady. The charge wouldn't last unless controlled manually. It was a death sentence. Kareth looked at Cole. "I'll stay," she said. "You carry the truth. You're what they fear. You need to get out." Cole shook his head. "You wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for me. I'm not letting you die to repay that." She stepped closer. "Then who stays?" The silence between them grew heavy. Then Cole took a deep breath. "I have an idea," he said. "What if we both survive?" He pointed to the power cell. "We can split the charge. Use a feedback loop. It'll be risky, but it might be enough to give us both time." Kareth raised an eyebrow. "You're not a tech." "No," he said, "but I've seen desperate plans work before." Together they rewired the panel. Sparks flew. The hum of the machines grew louder. The final door unlocked with a hiss, but the system was unstable. They had maybe 10 minutes before it shut down again, forever. They moved quickly through the tunnel, the air growing colder and the lights flickering. The walls were lined with more signs of Project Unity, symbols of peace, notes of cooperation, and final warnings. This bond must never fall into enemy hands. At the end of the tunnel, a light broke through a small hangar with a single escape pod, but just as they stepped inside, alarm screamed again. Kareth spun around. "They're here," she said. A voice echoed through the lab's old speaker. "System, cold, human, familiar. Subject X, you've done well. But this ends now." Cole froze. He recognized the voice. General Eric from Earth Command. The same man who sent him here. Kareth grabbed his arm. It was never just a mission. You were sent to be buried. Cole clenched his fists. Then we don't run, we fight. The doors to the hangar started opening. Enemy soldiers, fully armed, stepping through. But Cole didn't back down. Something inside him surged, not anger focus. Power. He was no longer just human. And they didn't know what he had become. This was no longer about survival. It was about choosing who they wanted to be. And both of them, enemy and ally, chose to stand together. Asterisk. The final breath. The first shot missed, but it wasn't meant to. It was a warning. A dozen armed figures stepped into the hangar, weapons raised, helmets reflecting the dim red lights. Behind them, a tall man in black armor walked slowly, his voice cold and calm. Stand down, subjects. You fulfilled your role. Cole's heart pounded. The voice, General Eric, sounded just like he remembered. No warmth, no hesitation. The kind of man who saw people as tools. And Cole had been one of them. From the start. Next to him, Kareth tensed, ready to strike. But Cole raised a hand. Not to surrender, but to step forward. I trusted you, Cole said. I followed your orders. You sent me here knowing I'd die. Eric nodded. You weren't meant to die, Cole. You were meant to become something useful. And now you've proven it works. The merger. The transformation. You're the first success. But that makes you dangerous. Cole looked down at his hands. His body still felt strange, stronger, faster, but not fully understood. His blood carried alien traits now. So did his mind. And he didn't know what it would do next. Eric raised his hand. We'll take the sample we need. The rest of you isn't required. That was it. That was the line. Kareth moved first, launching her blade through the air. The room exploded into chaos. Cole ran for the console, slammed the panel open, and activated the escape pod. Its engine began to whine, warming up, but it needed time. They didn't have it. Blaster fire lit up the hangar. Kareth moved like a shadow, silent, brutal, but there were too many. Cole turned back to the power core. He saw the main grid, exposed behind a cracked wall. If he overloaded it, the blast would give Kareth the cover she needed to reach the pod, but he wouldn't survive it. He didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the fire, bullets flying past him. He reached the core and grabbed the main cable. With both hands. The shock hit him instantly, raw energy burning through his body. But the strange new blood inside him slowed the damage, gave him just enough time. He looked back one last time. Kareth had made it to the pod. She looked at him through the glass, her eyes wide with fear. He smiled and pulled the cable loose. The explosion rocked the hangar, flames and light swallowing the soldiers, the walls, everything. The last thing Kareth saw before the pod launched was Cole, standing in the fire, unshaken, his body glowing for just a moment, then gone. Silence. Space. The pod flew through the dark. Far from the ruined lab, Kareth sat inside, shaking. The memory burned in her chest. He had given her life twice. And he hadn't even known her name the first time, but this time, she would make sure the galaxy knew his. She looked down at the console. His data was still stored there. The Unity files. The truth. And maybe, just maybe, a way to bring him back. Because what she didn't know, what no one could see, was that deep inside the ruined lab, in the crater of the blast, a single spark of life remained, and it was changing. Asterisk, a new warrior with a human heart, they said. No one could survive that explosion. When the rescue team finally arrived days later, they found only ash, scorched metal, and ruins buried under acid-stained stone. The hangar was gone. The lab erased. No bodies, no signals. Just silence, except for one thing. A single heat signature, weak but steady, buried under the rubble. They dug for hours. When they finally reached it, they found not a body, but a sealed pod. Not the one Kareth escaped in. A different one, older, hidden, protected by layers of emergency shielding that, activated just before the blast. Inside was Cole, barely alive, but breathing. His vitals were strange human heart, Zarine cells, something new in his blood. The medics had no name for it. His DNA had changed completely. The scientists called it impossible. The soldiers called it unnatural. But Kareth called it proof. She returned the moment she heard the news. She stepped off the rescue ship with no armor, no weapons, just the files she had saved from the destroyed lab. She walked straight through the human base, past guards and generals, and into Cole's recovery chamber. He opened his eyes when she entered, still weak, still silent. But his hand reached for hers without hesitation. "You shouldn't be alive," she said softly. "I could say the same about you," he answered. They sat in silence for a moment. No one else could understand what they had seen, what they had survived, what they had become. Together they presented the Unity files to the Council. The truth of the lab, the merging project, the lies that sent Cole on a death mission, and the living proof standing before them. The galaxy responded with fear first, then silence, and finally, hope, because if one human and one Zarine could trust each other in the face of death, maybe more could follow. Kareth never returned to her old army. Cole never took orders from Earth Command again. They became something else, something in between, messengers of what was possible when two enemies chose compassion over conquest. Years passed, stories spread. Some said the lab had rebuilt itself. Others whispered that more hybrids had been born in secret. But one thing was always certain across every world touched by war: people remembered the name Cole Vurin, not because he was a soldier, not because he survived the impossible, but because, with his last breath, he chose to save someone he didn't even know, and change two worlds forever.